Hello and welcome to News 9. I'm Aditya Raj Kaul and this is In India's Interest. Yet again, we are coming up with a show and a very special guest, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, the Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs and also one of the foremost and very well-known foreign policy experts who we have been hearing on India's national broadcaster as well. And he has come up with a new book, Friends, India's Closest Strategic Partners. You must in fact get a copy perhaps in a bookstore near you or perhaps the Amazon. Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, thank you very much for joining us. Let me first initially begin. I've attended your book launch in the past as well, and we've been listening to you continuously on the national broadcasters and your articles as well. Why this book? And it's a very different theme. You've chosen 7 closest strategic partners. Why these 7 partners and what difference do these partners make for India?
Well, thank you, Aditya. It's an honor to be on your show. Why this book? I thought that it's a dark and gloomy time in international affairs. There's a lot of conflict, friction, violence, warfare. But then I said, how is it that we are still alive and how is it that we still have a modicum of stability and security, right? And it comes because of cooperation. It's not all conflict. And sometimes even in the news there's more focus on the negative aspects, but then there are a lot of positive things happening also, especially as India is rising. So I asked myself, how is India rising? It's not only because of fast economic growth or because of military modernization. It's because we have these friends. We have these key countries, strategic partners with whom we are doing amazing economic, military and geopolitical coordination, which is what is enabling our rise, if not fully then substantially through these partnerships. So I said, I need to chronicle these. And second thing, Aditya, nobody has written a book about a variety of partners. Generally in scholarship, you have like people who are specialists in one country. For example, Japan. They'll write a whole book on India-Japan partnership. Or somebody is writing Australia-India, US-India, Russia-India, Israel-India, UAE-India, France-India.
This is a comprehensive account of...
So this, in one book, you actually in 7 chapters plus an introduction, you get to know about the whole gamut of our most important friendships or our best friends, and why are they best friends, what are we gaining from them and what are we giving back to them. All this is mentioned in here.
Well, Dr. Chaulia, I'll come to the specific countries. I'll come to the issues also, including the geopolitical issues today, the dark times that you speak about, the wars as well. But first I want to understand from you that what is so different about India's foreign policy today. In the last decade that we have had Prime Minister Narendra Modi, what is this paradigm shift in foreign policy that is being witnessed? I personally have traveled with Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister to over more than 15 countries, beginning with in 2014 the G20 in Australia. And I have also witnessed over the years a significant shift not just in our foreign policy but the way other countries look at India today. There's a growing respect, and even if you interact with the diaspora in different countries, they can sense this respect. So what has changed?
Aditya, I talk about India in this book as a viable leader, a beneficial partner and a dependable friend. That captures what you're talking about. In the Modi era, we have really invested in key partnerships, as I've shown. Not only these 7, which I consider our best friends forever kind of status, but also many others. We have around 36 strategic partnerships. And we have also got more clarity in the Modi era on who our adversaries are. Earlier, we used to be ambiguous, or at most we used to think of Pakistan as our problem. But increasingly with the Chinese pressure, the Chinese intimidation, expansionism and all that, it has become our number one challenge, How do we manage this challenge without these friendships? So what I'm trying to show here is also that friends and enemies are 2 sides of the same coin. Right. And Modi era, I would say that strategic clarity has come about with a lot of these countries. We had actually signed strategic partnerships way back in the late 1990s and 2000s, But now we are really giving strategic content, substance and intent to the relationships, that was not there in the past. So that's, I think, the big change. I would say more of a security orientation and more of a national security prioritization in our foreign policy, closer integration between the civilian side and the defense side in our diplomacy. There's more defense diplomacy, for example. All these, I think, are big markers of change.
Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott was our guest at the News 9 Global Summit that happened earlier this year. And one of the things that he said there and at other events as well was that the 21st century is the Asian century, and in Asia it is the Indian century in many ways. You mentioned this in the context of the India-US pragmatic strategic collaboration or partnership that has happened. Japan plays a critical role as well when it comes to India-Japan ties that have really grown by leaps and bounds in the recent years. How do you see, particularly when it comes to US? You know, we've seen these very dramatic elections that have taken place, and there's been a bipartisan support. We've had, you know, different administrations supporting India, but there is a difference when it comes to Trump. What is this difference, and what kind of a change would we witness now on post January 20th when Trump administration comes to power?
Yeah, on the Asian century, Aditya, I would say that sometimes people club China and India together when they use this construct. But I think in the Modi era, what we have shown is India's rise is distinct. It cannot be clubbed with China or taken together, because China is an adversary and they have a different path. You know, they are very authoritarian and almost totalitarian under Xi Jinping, and they are trying to impose their will on other countries. Our rise is not that kind of rise. You know, we are taking along. We have built all these partnerships. We don't do alliances, but we have strategic partnerships.
Basically, a bully cannot be compared with a Democrat, with somebody who believes in democracy.
Exactly, exactly. And when the democracy rises, you know, people stand up and salute because they needed this. Even the Americans, coming to your question, you know, when they took over as the great power from Great Britain after World War II, it was a smooth transition. Great Britain did not stop or try to prevent America from rising, because they said, here is another fellow democracy, and they share, you know, ethnic origin and all that. So they said, okay, we will pass on the baton to you. But and so when India rises, a lot of these Western countries, including the US, do realize that at the end of the day, it will be independent. It will not toe the American line on everything. We have a strategic autonomy, but it is still preferable to a China rising and China overtaking the US. So I think if you look at the fundamentals, whether it is Biden or now Trump, that will remain. You know, the only difference, of course, is with Trump, because he is a populist. He brings his own, you know, unique thinking and ideology about world affairs. He is generally quite critical of partners. So while US-India has a strong and roaring strategic partnership that I show in the book, you can expect some friction, especially on economic issues. On military issues and defense cooperation, I expect that there will be a ramp up. It will in fact get better. Indo-Pacific coordination, Trump may not be as much of a coalition builder like Biden. But nonetheless, I think there is still a so-called permanent establishment in the US, the Defense Department, the State Department, the American corporates. I mean, the kind of business they're doing in India is the, you know, after China, if you ask, I mean, this is the biggest growth story for corporate America. And now we have crossed $200 billion in trade, and US investment in India is pouring in. So I expect that those things will continue, although Trump has an economic nationalistic approach. So he will try to put some brakes on this, or simply escalate some kind of a, you know, challenge, and then he will say, okay, let's sit down and let's do a deal. So in that sense, he's a little predictable now, unlike his first term. And I think we have now built the relationships. Prime Minister Modi is personally close to him, and we have not snapped those ties in the last 4 years. At some level, we have been engaging. And I think now that he's back in power, the new appointees, most of them suggest to me that US-India partnership will go forward, because the Chinese, you know, will remain a challenge for them. A lot of China hawks have been named in the new incoming Trump cabinet. So that triangular thing, where US-India are on one side and trying to prevent a Chinese takeover of Asia or of the Indo-Pacific, that fundamental strategic logic will continue.
I want to, you know, take this forward and ask you about the Asian regional securities architecture. In the context of the Indo-Pacific that you mentioned, where apart from India, US, Japan and Australia play a very critical role. And we saw very recently some kind of a, you know, talks or diplomacy paving the way forward between India and China. In Kazan and post-Kazan, we've had some developments taking place. Are you optimistic that when it comes to India and China, there is a roadmap of these talks that will lead to peace at the border? Or do you think this friction will continue and the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Indo-Pacific cooperation will play a predominant role rather than, you know, economy, trade, etc. by the same countries?
Yeah, Aditya, I'm not so sanguine about any kind of peace with China, because, you know, the nature of the state, like I said, it's a brutal dictatorship, and they have a certain, you know, notion of power that is based on dominance and, you know, asserting one's or imposing one's will on others, on weaker countries or weaker forces. as the communists would say. So I think we have reached a pragmatic understanding for disengagement and hopefully de-escalation at the line of actual control. But that doesn't mean that the competition and the rivalry in Asia and beyond will subside, because we are in the same geographic space. This is not like Brazil rising, right? I mean, thousands of miles away. This is China right next door. And our backyard, our traditional sphere of influence, Indian Ocean, the Chinese are intruding and are trying to disrupt the traditional Indian leadership in the region. And so they are posing a direct challenge, and not only territorial but also in the oceans. So I think with the US, with Australia, with Japan, the Quad partners, as I've shown both bilaterally and also quadrilaterally, this is going to be a compact group, and all of us have something to lose from China's rise. So while the Quad doesn't go out and openly from a rooftop shout that we are all ganging up against China, there is a clear intent, which is to prevent a Sino-centric regional and global order, and to prevent that from happening. So to that extent, the coordination is going to continue, and I will not rule out future crises with China. I mean, right now they are trying to recalibrate with a new US administration coming in, and their primary focus is always on Taiwan and on South China Sea against Vietnam and against Philippines. But their secondary so-called two ocean strategy is we have to push the US out of the Pacific, and we have to also come into the Indian Ocean and become major players there, and in the process they will displace us, or that's what they don't mind displacing us. They often say, why should Indian Ocean be exclusively for India? We can also come and be big bosses over there. So there is I think a clash there, and it will not be resolved anytime soon, and because of which many of these friendships will matter. Even the Russia factor, because of the closeness with China, we can discuss that. But with the Quad countries, I think the China will be one of the driving factors going forward.
Well, I want to step into Russia now. In fact, one of the another closest friends of India, and at a time when the war between Russia and Ukraine will almost complete 3 years in a few weeks from now, India has maintained a steadfast, trustworthy relationship with Putin. Modi and Putin met. Modi also went to Ukraine and met Zelensky. Prime Minister Modi very famously is known to have said that this is not an era of war, and told both these world leaders that solutions cannot be found in the battlefield. How do you see the way forward? I asked this in the context of the European countries giving a lot of grief to India, a lot of lectures at the beginning of the war about taking oil, energy from Russia, having defense partnership with Russia at a time when sanctions were underway and the war was underway, which they describe as Russia's aggression in Ukraine. But India has maintained that we are on the side of peace, we want diplomacy, and we stand with our own strategic autonomy. How do you see this relationship between India and Russia taking the world forward, and also India, in spite of all challenges and pressures, taking a strong stance?
Yeah, in fact, Aditya, the chapter on Russia, it says the long bear hug, Russia and India against all odds. And that refers to what you're talking about. We were friends when there was a bipolar era where there were only two superpowers, Soviet Union and the US. Yes. We were friends in the unipolar era after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and now in the emerging multipolar era where there are going to be multiple power centers including India, we are still friends. So this is actually our longest lasting strategic partnership among all these. And the reason I think we have, as I show in the chapter also of this book, is initially, Russia was very wary of Chinese, shadow overtaking their sphere of influence. So they looked to India to balance China in the Eurasian landmass. That was a driving factor, from the 1960s, 70s onwards, when there was a split between China and the Soviet Union. Then, over time, what has happened is, because we have grown closer to the US and its allies, like Japan and Australia, the Russians have become a little, I would say, maybe they're disappointed, but they understand that, it's not aimed against Russia. Our closeness to the US does not harm Russia in any way, So to that extent, we've been able to convince them, and vice versa. Our closeness to Russia does not harm the US, and American interests or European interests. We have tried to, explain this to them, that we have certain defense needs, we have certain legacy relationship with Russia. We can't just snap it off overnight and say, okay, we will now acquire all our weapons from some other country. By the way, France has come in, and I have a full chapter on France. France has become a major defense partner of ours. Maybe it may even overtake Russia in the years to come. So we are diversifying, but still Russia is important. I would say it is no longer the number one or the topmost strategic partner as it used to be. But it's there in the mix. I would still rate it in the top 7 as I've done in this book. And we have shown our autonomy, and I think we are having it both ways, because the Western countries still need us for the counterbalancing of China and because of our market. So just because we are close to Russia, they are not imposing sanctions or cutting off relations with us. So we are in that what is called a geopolitical sweet spot, where we are able to extract maximum advantage from different sides. How long this will last, I don't know. For the moment, we are able to juggle different balls and still keep them in the air.
Dr. Chaulia, I'll move a little further closer to India and towards the West Asia or the Middle East that we call. One of the transformative stories of the last decade has been Modi's reach out to the Muslim world. And nobody had expected this with the kind of image that Prime Minister Modi had. But he proved the naysayers completely wrong. In fact, what I've witnessed personally is that there's a lot of respect that the Muslim world in the Middle East in particular has for Prime Minister Modi and his vision for India, especially when it comes to foreign policy and the economic capabilities that India has. And one of those transformative stories is about the UAE. How would you describe that? You mentioned this as I2U2, the transformative story really. But how has this game changer bilateral relationship really happened?
It's an incredible story. You're right, Aditya. The UAE is one of our newest best friends. Russia is the oldest, then UAE is the newest. Just 10 years, it's a complete turnaround. I think Prime Minister Modi, because of his business background and the Gujarati, he said that business commerce runs in my blood. I'm from Gujarat. He understood the importance of the Gulf monarchies from economic modernization standpoint for the country, for India. And he wanted to attract their sovereign wealth funds, he wanted to open our markets to them, and he wanted to give them a pragmatic deal. Stop thinking in ideological and religious terms. We also have Muslims. There are more than 200 million Muslims in India, right? And they are fairly well protected, and there's no such discrimination against them. They are equal citizens. And see that, and look at the overall market size. It's a 800 million people in the middle class is going to continue growing. It's a tremendous opportunity for these countries. And he appealed to those pragmatic instincts. And Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler of the UAE, really saw that. He turned it around with Prime Minister Modi together. And you find that in all spheres, not only economic, even strategic cooperation. You know very well how the UAE has become our main foreign partner to stabilize Kashmir Valley after the abrogation of Article 370 last 5 years. UAE has not shown any radical ideological lenses. They've just taken them off. And in the book, I give the example of what happened in 1999 when the IC-814 plane was hijacked and taken to Kandahar. It went via Dubai. And that we are talking about 25 years ago, when this partnership had been dormant. At most we had expatriates working there, and we were buying oil. That's all. But strategic component was missing. Now, if the same incident happened, if somebody were to hijack something, let's say, God forbid, but suppose something like that were to happen, you can expect 100% cooperation from UAE authorities to interdict and to stop them. At that time, the plane took off from Dubai, and was allowed to go to Kandahar, and the rest of the story. It was a national humiliation for us.
The story would be very different.
Yeah, it would be different. And on counter-terrorism, along with Israel, the UAE has also recognized Israel. Despite the war, despite the unfortunate violence that's been going on since last October 2023, the UAE has not completely distanced itself from Israel, because it's a pragmatic country. It has moved in that direction. Even Saudi Arabia, to a lesser extent, although it has more of a legacy of supporting Wahhabi fundamentalism around the world, they are also slowly liberalizing, not as much as the UAE. So I think they are perfect fits. These kind of countries have become perfect fits. And by the way, UAE also has open relations with Iran, which has been shunned by other players in the region. So we have a strategic partnership with Iran. So with UAE also, so both with Israel and with Iran, who are at loggerheads, UAE has channels to both sides. So UAE, I think, is like a open vessel which can, it is willing to be fill in whichever direction as per the wind, and to enhance its own prosperity and its own weight. So it is also distanced a little away from the US to show its own autonomy. So again, they like India because of that reason. Whenever I engage with Emiratis, they say, we like your strategic autonomy and we are also moving in that direction. They have a US alliance type of relationship, but they increasingly believe that they must engage with other countries like India to show their independence. So all these factors bring us very close, and religion in a way has been taken out of the picture, and that's a great thing, because foreign relations should be based on pragmatic give and take.
Well, recently we had a Jewish priest who was killed in UAE, and immediately within 72 hours, based on the UAE intelligence, they were picked up in Turkey, and that clearly indicates the partnership that UAE and Israel really have as of now. But that brings me to the question and partnership that India has with Israel, and that has seen a phenomenal change in the last 10 years. I mean, beginning with the establishment of the diplomatic ties over in early 90s to now a phenomenal change. I've been to Israel at least 3 times in the last few years, and I could see that personally. One, an immense love for India and Indians, and of course, on a lighter note, the people who go for training for the IDF, they mandatorily come to India to unwind after that. But presently, in the context of the long war that's underway against Hamas and Hezbollah, indirectly between Iran and Israel, where does India stand? And when it comes to the strategic defense and technology cooperation between India and Israel, where have we reached now? Because I still feel that the zenith hasn't really been reached.
Yeah, you're right. The Israel chapter in my book is called Brothers in Arms. Israel and India take on common dangers. So yes, under Modi, Prime Minister Modi, we have really gone much further. It's become much more open. He was the first Indian leader to set foot in Israel after so many decades of independence. So he has really taken it out of the closet, and the cooperation is multidimensional. But you're right, the defense and military and counterterrorism are the key components. Not all of it is declassified. So, but whatever is happening and is publicly known, it's quite significant for national security.
They don't speak about it much in public.
Yeah, that's right. But nonetheless, very advanced cooperation is happening in different arenas, and that actually supports the national security priorities of both sides. So it's beneficial. And for example, they get an understanding of the jihadist ecosystem in South Asia from our agencies, and we get one from what is happening in the West Asia or the Middle East. And nowadays, with the travel and the frequent communications, transnational terrorism, it's very important that we coordinate. I show how many people have been interdicted in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and have been sent back to India, most wanted terrorists. They cooperate with us. So I think those sorts of things are happening, and with Israel also. Israelis are closely involved in monitoring and surveillance of radical elements and all that. So it's good. I think it helps to strengthen the national security. And I think with the war, as you asked me, we have a balance. I show that how it has evolved. After the October 7 attack, we said we cannot accept terrorism like this, and Israelis appreciated it. But once the war kept on dragging, month after month after month, and now it is more than 1 year, we have come around to the position that it should not be endless. There should be an end to conflict. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. And beyond a point, our old traditional view is there must be some kind of a political settlement through dialogue. You can't just bulldoze your way or just completely smash your adversaries and declare victory. That would be like maybe a victory of the graveyard, because by the time you would have raised everything to the ruins. So I think we are now supporting the idea of a ceasefire and of talks and all those things. And I've shown the evolution of the Indian position. Israelis understand it, and they also understand that even with their partners like UAE, the Abraham Accords that Trump had brokered, all those are in danger if this war goes on permanently. Even these moderate Arab countries cannot justify friendly relations with Israel if the war goes on. So I think it is in the best interest of all of us that these wars are brought to a close. So we are supporting the peace processes or attempted peace processes, and we'll continue to do so. Our IMEC corridor, India Middle East Economic Europe corridor, all the way up to Israel, and from the port of Haifa to Europe, across the Mediterranean, all that are stalled, and so we need cooperation in this region, and we are a player. We believe, like you said earlier, even in the Russia context, is not an era of war, Prime Minister says. That's because, if there is war and instability, our commercial interests will also be hurt. So it is not like we are doing charity for any country by saying we need to have peace, or we are trying to facilitate or ferry messages between warring parties. We are doing those kinds of constructive diplomacy because it is in our core national interests for these wars to end.
Absolutely. One final question that I have, and this is regarding, often we see some elements of foreign policy used, especially by the Western countries, to arm twist. And you would know the direction that I'm going now. And two of the countries that you mentioned, US and Australia, that have been close partners, close strategic partners of India. But we've seen the Five Eyes intelligence. We've seen subjects like the Khalistani terror not being taken very seriously by these countries. Do you expect a change? And also not just in the context of the Khalistani terror or propaganda, but overall in the context of information warfare that usually happens against India, and not just the West, China or Pakistan, for instance. Do you expect a significant shift, at least when it comes to these closest strategic partners of India?
Aditya, there's no Canada on this book. So it's quite clear. We have never even signed a strategic partnership with Canada.
Yes.
Forget a very advanced, comprehensive strategic partnership like with some of these friends. Australia and the US relatively have not been as nasty and as offensive as Canada has been on this matter. But you're right, they have not cracked down on these radical elements which are misusing the hospitality of Western liberal societies to shoot at us from there. So there is a problem, and we have been conveying, we have shared enough intelligence about most wanted terrorists who are taking shelter in the UK, in the US, in Australia, and all these places. We would like law enforcement to crack down on them and to curtail their activities. But I think what they are doing is that in the name of liberal values and minority rights and human rights, and using multiculturalism and these kind of tropes, what they're doing is they're letting them be, and they say that, oh, in our country all kinds of actors, as long as they're not directly attacking on their home soil in the US or in Australia or in the UK, they are allowed to function and operate. So I think at one level that is a problem, where they don't see why we are so sensitive about this matter. They think that, well, these elements cannot really disrupt peace and harmony in Punjab, but that's not true, because there is a cross carry forward of that radical currents from sitting there all the way into our Punjab. So I think we are continuing to try and impress upon them, and it will be difficult because of the different kind of polities they are. In these Western liberal societies, all kinds of people are allowed to mobilize and to demonstrate and to carry out protests and all kinds of, but incitement to violence they do prohibit. And so we have to, I think, take recourse to their local laws better and use that, and the intelligence sharing must continue. And I think we should also move away from this conspiracy theory that all of them are ganging up to suppress India. I don't think that is good for us, because we need these Western friends. There's no doubt about it, and for our China problem and all that, which is a much bigger problem than Khalistan, it's a long-term, gigantic strategic challenge. China is a great power today. How do we counterbalance it? So let's keep those things in mind. Let's not get overly carried away, in my view, about some of these controversies. And I expect with Trump coming in, we will have much better coordination on these matters, because he's a no-nonsense type of character and he has very strong views on these kind of things. If somebody tells them there's a bunch of terrorists who are harming India, who are sitting right in San Francisco or New York and carrying out destabilizing activities, he will say, let's deport them right away. Let's hand them over to India. So I'm expecting more counter-terrorism type of cooperation to come in, and it should hopefully settle this matter.
Well, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, always a pleasure interacting with you. Best wishes with this book. Friends, India's closest strategic partners, that's the book that you need to grab your hands on. One of the best foreign policy thinkers from India at present. But also, let's hope you come up with a new book as well, not just for India as a global peacemaker, but India as a leader of the global south as well. All the very best.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thanks.